Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. John sent me a great email, and it's kind of funny. I get a lot of ideas for videos from emails, and a lot of them are people saying, "Hey, Steve, did you see this in the news? See that in the news?" And once in a while, someone will throw something at me, and it's like a curveball. It's like a slider thrown by Fernando Valenzuela in his prime. Um, Look it up. And he says, Steve, he goes, you could title it "I Feel Old" or "Cars in the Good Old Days." And what he's talking about is, and this is funny, everyone talks about how times change and, nowadays things are blah, 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 blah. How times have changed with cars. And every now and then I'll mention something like this because, I talk about the old days with the cars, Tucker, that's a Tucker, or 60s cars, 60s cars, So things have changed. And the funny thing is that when you start thinking about it, it's a fascinating topic because some of the changes are subtle, some of them are quite earth-shaking, and a lot of it has to do with how complicated things have become. And again, it's the old folks shaking their fists at clouds, talking about how simple things were in the old days. But it is kind of funny to think about specifically with cars, how things were in the old days. And so he says, for instance, the fact that you used to be able to tell a Chevy from a Ford. There was a time when I was in high school, and I'm talking about the 70s. When I was in high school, I could see a car coming at night and tell you by the headlights, make, model, and year within a year or two, based on the headlights and the marker lights and so on. But you could tell by the grill, for instance, of a car. Nowadays, all bets are off, especially because, number one, there's more makes on the road, but also because many of them are starting to look alike. That's the scary part. He says, of course, and I've talked about this many times, you pop the hood on a car nowadays, and you might not even know what you're looking at. And you can't get anything because there's plastic covers over everything. And in the old days, I had a 69 Dodge Charger. You pop the hood, there's an engine, there's an air cleaner. You pull that air cleaner off, you can get at everything, okay? And plug wires right there, air cleaner right there. The hoses, you knew what they all were, okay? It would be a while before they started having things like, air pumps and so on, underneath the hood, and then, control modules and stuff. Didn't have those. Also, for instance, back in the old days, not only could you work on the car easier, but if the car cranked but wouldn't start, is a very, very simple thing to check. The few things it could be: you're out of gas. Is it getting gas? Check. Is the ignition getting spark to it? And is the carburetor stuck or something? Very, very simple troubleshooting in the old days. Nowadays, the car won't start. It could be a programming error. It could be a blown electrical thing somewhere. You may have to put a reader on it or take it to a dealership where they're going to put a reader on it. So, that's, of course, a very, very different thing. Likewise, in the old days, if a car would crank but not start, or if it would just click, 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 you knew pretty simply it was a dead battery or an ignition solenoid. And on some vehicles, as an ignition solenoid went bad, occasionally you could whack it just right and get one or two more starts out of it. He points out it was mounted on the fender with a Ford. And I remember seeing guys climb underneath the car and whack the starter underneath there to see if that would help. Sometimes it would, amazingly enough. And we could debate all day long whether or not it's better to have a car that is helped by you hitting something on it with a hammer. But, that's when cars were cars. Also, just how some things have moved around on cars. Nowadays, of course, many cars don't have a key that you put into an ignition. I can have my key in my pocket, the fob, and I walk out and I can just reach the door and the door will unlock itself as I open the door handle. And of course, my '02 Ford Explorer has got an ignition thingy on the steering column, and when you pull the key out, it locks the steering column. And I remember cars that didn't have locking steering columns, and in fact, the key wasn't in the column; the key was in the dashboard. And the key might be on the left-hand side, might be on the right-hand side, but the key that goes in the dashboard to start the car means that the steering column is always unlocked, even when you put the car, away. You shut the car off, walk away from it. The steering column's not locked. I remember towing cars in the old days and having to tow a car by picking it up from the back, and the front wheels weren't locked in place. And we used to always carry a strap or a belt, like a man's belt, a leather belt. And you put the belt around the steering wheel, yank it nice and tight, and pull it through where the A pillar is and slam the door shut. and hope that that would hold the tires in place. Usually it would, but you had to be careful with that because when the belt comes loose or something breaks, the car will just swing wildly one direction or the other. He also points out the change in sound systems. I owned cars that had an AM radio and one speaker. Literally. AM radio in the dash, one speaker. And in Detroit in the 1970s, you could listen to CKLW. You could listen to Honey Radio, oldies station. And occasionally there'd be other things that you could listen to, but, news talk. But there wasn't a whole lot of music on the AM. So if you were a teenager driving around with an AM radio and one speaker, you weren't hearing good music. I remember when I first put a Pioneer Super Tuner into a car to get better sound. Oh, those are good days. And he points out, of course, that later FM did come to cars along with the big innovation being 8-track tapes. But many people don't remember when there's a thing called an FM converter. You could get an FM converter. It was an FM box, and you'd have to wire it into your system, and you could then listen to FM radio in your car that was only equipped with an AM radio from the factory. A lot of work, and nowadays, of course, cars come with radios that have AM and FM, generally speaking. So also cassette decks came along too, which is pretty cool. Of course, there were no power windows back in the old days. You had window cranks, and nowadays we think nothing of it. You're driving down the road, you need to roll down your passenger window. In the old days, you had to lean over and crank it. And the older cars are bigger, so you had to have long arms like me, or if you were a short-armed person, you might not be able to roll that window down while you're driving. Sorry. So, other thing along with window cranks, a lot of cars didn't have the electric door locks for many, many years. And many cars simply had a little door lock you'd reach over and pull up with your fingers or push down with your fingers. And of course, if the door lock was shaped like a mushroom or had a cap on top of it, a person could get a coat hanger and use the coat hanger to get in through the top of the window and go down and grab that door lock and unlock the door. That's why you'd often see people who locked their keys in their car using a coat hanger trying to get into their car. And of course, criminals could do that too if they wanted to go to the trouble of using a coat hanger but not smashing the window out. But I remember, like in my car, the '69 Dodge Charger, and I didn't want people to be able to break into it. I actually removed you could unscrew the cap on the door lock, and you could buy ones that were simply smooth things. You could grab them with your fingers, but you could not get a coat hanger around it. And I put those on both sides of the car. That was my high-tech theft deterrent system in 1979. Also, cars didn't have remote starts, cup holders, or even consoles where you could put stuff like that. They might have a center console that you could put something in, but cup holders. And it's just kind of funny how we've transitioned from we used a car to get from point A to point B. Now we spend time in our car to the point where the car's got to be comfortable. You have to be able to eat while driving. So you have cup holders that can hold a big gulp the size of a small trash can. And that was just an unheard of concept in the old days. I remember going through drive-thrus with my '69 Dodge Charger and having to juggle everything because I had no place to put it. But, that's what you did back then. It's what made us grow up and be men. Just kidding. Full-service gas stations. I worked at a full-service gas station. I was one of the guys who would run out, not just pump your gas, check your oil, check your tires, wash your windows front and back, and also, just generally speaking, try to upsell you on stuff or whatever it was. And I mean, I remember people came in who had bad leaky tires every single time. Check the tires. Oh, 3 of them are low. We didn't have gas air pumps out at the gas pumps. You had to actually pull around, and so you sell them the gas. They pull around. You got to walk around the car, put air in the tires. I remember places that actually had the guys wearing uniforms. I actually got to wear jeans and a t-shirt. I mean, I was one of the more liberal gas stations. And so, they charged more for that, but they also had to, pay these guys more money to run out and do that stuff. And he remembers, and he points out, do you remember when gas was 40 cents a gallon? In my lifetime, it got as low as 25 cents a gallon because he mentions there were gas station wars. There were price wars, gas wars, they called them. And it was not uncommon back in the 60s and 70s that you'd have an intersection with a gas station on each corner. Literally, corner. I mean, it was worse than Starbucks, but they weren't all the same company. It's just that there would be 4 gas stations. There's a Sunoco, a Shell, a Standard, and a Mobil, okay? And they're competing with each other. And so, one place had dropped their price to $59.9, $57.9, $55.9, $53.9. And before you knew it, I remember there being, gas wars where it dropped to a quarter a gallon, 25 cents a gallon. You could buy 4 gallons for $1. Okay. And that's because these gas stations were doing that, just trying to build up business and so on. But of course, this is also in a time when like credit cards, gas charge cards are fairly uncommon. And so they knew there was no brand loyalty back then. It was simply price. People would cross the street for a couple pennies a gallon. When there's 4 stations all day long doing that, you'd see a spiral go down, and it would actually help the consumers quite a bit. So that was something. Doesn't happen anymore for some odd reason. Another thing he mentions is when gas stations gave away stuff, they give you premiums to come in. And I mean, I remember pumping gas in the late 70s and giving away glasses, drinking glasses that have a mobile emblem on one side and a Detroit Lions emblem on the other side. And I'm not joking, had a hard time giving them away. You'd say, hey, by the way, you got a full tank of gas. You get a free glass here with the Lions logo on the side. And they go, no, thanks. And I remember halfway through the promotion, we accidentally got shipped a box with Raiders, the LA Raiders logos on the side. And I remember maybe in Oakland, I forgot where they were in that year, but they were someplace in California. And I remember getting these things with the Raiders logos on them and saying, do you want a glass? And they're like, is it a Lions glass? No, it's a Raiders glass. Oh yeah, I'll take that. Anything but the Lions. Okay, the Lions, by the way, have had a historical quality of being horrible ever since they've pretty much existed. Although, I'm sorry, back in the 50s they were good. During my lifetime, horrible. So, premiums. You actually get things like they'd give you a little styrofoam ball that you put on the antenna of your car back when cars had antennas. And it might be a little orange thing that says 76 on the side for the Union 76 logo. If you wanted to put that in your car, they'd let you. So they'd have premiums. There's a lot of mugs and things you could collect, glasses and so on. But again, they would try to entice you to buy their stuff. And a couple other things about the cars in the old days that I think many people don't remember until you talk to some guys who own classic cars, is that in the day of keys, an ignition key to start your car, GM and Ford, keys went with the teeth pointing down. Chrysler, the teeth are pointing up. And I actually know someone who had a Chrysler product, handed the keys to someone else that said, start my car. And they walked over, stuck the key in upside down, and screwed the ignition of the car up. They didn't know any better. Chrysler, teeth up. Ford, GM, teeth down. Chrysler did it, I assume, to be different. And, for the most part, it makes sense. But once in a while, you get somebody who doesn't know that. And I remember being at a gas station where we were working on cars and stuff. And you get someone new and you hand them the keys, go, hey, pull that car around. By the way, it's Chrysler, teeth up. And they're like, what are you talking about? Because to unlock the door, it's got to go into the teeth up also. Teeth up, Chrysler, teeth down, GM and Ford. One of those things. Likewise, the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey thing, on lug nuts. That's true on Ford, GM, and a bunch of other cars, but not Chrysler. Chrysler's lugs on the right-hand side, the passenger side of the car, were normal. The lugs on the driver's side were backwards, meaning it was lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. And they'd be stamped, if you look very, very closely, with an L, indicating left-hand thread. And there's a reason for that. It's a very, very minor reason. It has to do with how the lug and the lug nuts act as a car rolls down the road with the tires rotating. And the rotating mass wanting to, in essence, undo the lug nut. And so the tire is rolling one way, it's fine. Rolling the other way, it actually is acting in the opposite direction. So they actually put left-handed threads on the left-hand side of the car. So if you owned a Chrysler, like my 69 Dodge Charger, you'd remember 2 things. Teeth up, left-hand side, left-hand threads. So those are some more things about the old school things about cars. And I have to remind you that in the old days, we didn't get these little sissy scissor jacks that you put underneath the middle of the car to jack the car up by the side. You got a bumper jack because your car had a metal bumper on it. Okay, so your car's got a metal bumper on it. You can get a bumper jack, and the bumper jack is this black metal base that's got this post in it. Post has got notches in it, and you put this thing, and you literally just hook it underneath the metal bumper of the car. There's a metal bumper for you. That bumper weighs more than most cars today. Put the metal hook underneath that bumper, and you go chick, 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 and you jack the car up by the bumper, a bumper jack, okay? Those days are long gone. They haven't had metal bumpers in cars in years. Okay, so again, I'm bemoaning the good old days having gone, because back then cars were built to last. They were built simply and they were built beautifully. So I'm sure I missed a whole bunch. Put them below. Otherwise, questions or comments. Talk to you later. Bye bye.